Welcome back to the channel, y'all. Today we're going to be pulling the cylinder head off of this 1997 triple locked Toyota Land Cruiser. If you've been following along, thanks for joining us again. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to be notified of new videos as they get uploaded, hit that bell icon right next to the subscribe button. Now let's get started. Last time we left off here, if you remember, we did a full scope of each, we sent the camera down each of the cylinders. We actually sent the scope up each of the exhaust ports, looked at the back of the valves and everything. We verified that the head gasket is indeed good. We did a leak down test very thoroughly, identified that a couple of valves weren't seating correctly. I cleaned up the carbon buildup on those two cylinders on the back of the exhaust valves and the ports. They sealed up fantastic. Our leak down test on all 6 cylinders was between 3% to about 9 or 10% leak down at the worst. That's very good, a very healthy motor. No pressure coming out of the coolant ports, the oil ports on the cylinder head, or the exhaust valves or intake valves that was anything unusual. So everything was healthy. Now, why are we changing the head gasket? We don't have to. We can just put it all back together and get all the seals replaced, get the oil leaks fixed up, and put the motor back together. The reason why I'm doing the head gasket and pulling the cylinder head off, as odd as it might seem, is really to get everything cleaned up. I want to get all this carbon buildup cleaned up. 2 of the valve stem seals are dripping just a little bit, not bad, but a little bit, and I want to get those replaced as well. They're not causing any harm. We could put all of this back together, and more than anything, I just want to get all this clean as possible. I want the cylinder head out of the way so I have better access to everything under there, so I can go at it with a scrub brush and some degreaser. I want to pull the power steering pump off as well, get that all cleaned up. It's functioning well, it's not leaking, there's no problems with it, but I'm going to be replacing some of the power steering hoses, the high pressure line, and some other components, so might as well pull the cylinder head off and get everything fixed up under there and cleaned up to the best of my ability. And today we're going to get through the next step of this process by pulling the cylinder head off of the motor. First thing we have to do is get everything situated here, get the timing set to where number 1 is at top dead center, get the cam caps off, get it all organized. Before I do any of that, I'm going to grab a couple pieces of cardboard, punch some holes in them so that we have a place to put all of these bolts and all of the parts that are coming off. First thing you want to do is put cylinder number 1 at top dead center. I've got this in here to know that it's at top dead center. As I rotated the crank, that tool came all the way up. And then we also want to make sure that our gears are set up to where the cam gears have that timing mark. You see the one that's painted right in between them? That mark is lined up even on the back of both of those cam gears. Now, when those are lined up correctly, you know you're at top dead center and all of the valves are closed. You can also verify that by looking at the cam lobes and seeing that none of them on cylinder number 1 are pushing the valves down. Next, you want to put 4 zip ties around the chain on this sprocket that runs the timing chain. 1, 2, 3, 4. Get those nice and snug. I'm just going to leave them like that for now. I'll cut them here in a minute. After that, the next thing we want to do is take out the timing chain tensioner, which is this guy here. That is the spring-loaded tensioner. You've got 2 nuts, 2 12mm nuts. Let's take those off, and this will come right out. Sometimes it's in there a little snug. You might need to put a little flathead behind it or wiggle it around with some wide jaw pliers, and just be gentle, take your time. It'll come out eventually. Sometimes they get stuck. There's that guy. Had to wiggle it out little by little. That's a little hydraulic spring tensioner. This thing, this ram here, gets pushed out by hydraulic pressure inside there. And that's what puts tension on the timing chain guide and in turn tightens up the timing chain. Now that that's out, you can see that we've got slack on our timing chain. Next, we're going to pull off the nut that's holding on this sprocket and the distributor cam gear. In order to pull this nut off, you're going to need to hold the intake cam gear in place. And to do that, you want to put a big wrench or a set of pliers on the hex section of the camshaft, and that'll give you enough leverage so that you can hold it there and undo this bolt right here. We've got that out. Now I'm going to wiggle off this drive gear that's on the sprocket. This is what turns the distributor shaft that comes in through this hole here. So I'm going to pull that off, and then we're going to wiggle this sprocket little by little, side to side, wiggle it off of the intake cam, and that should have the chain and gear and everything separated from the cam gear. The distributor cam gear is off, and the timing chain gear is off as well. We're just going to leave it loose right here. Next, I went ahead and removed the cam cap on the exhaust on the very last one here. I turned the cams until there wasn't a bolt in this hole, but this is the service hole. You put a bolt through it in order to hold the two halves of the cam gear on the exhaust side together. They are spring loaded, so if you remove the exhaust cam without putting the service bolt in, that spring will come unwound and you won't be able to put it back together. So you do need to put this in before you do any further work. Just remove that last cam cap. That should give you enough room to put a bolt in. Leave the rest in place for now. As I'm taking these cam caps off, I want to keep them organized, so in order to do that, I grabbed a used Amazon box, and this side I'm going to be putting all of the exhaust cam caps along with the bolts in the right places where they were before, and then on this side we're going to be putting the intake cam caps. I'm going to go through and crack every single bolt loose. I'm going to go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and so on. And then I'm going to come back little by little, loosen up each one until we've got all of them unthreaded, and then we'll pop the cam caps off one by one. Now that all the cam caps are loosened up, what I'm going to do is one by one take them to the cardboard box and place them there along with the bolts, still in the cam caps in the same locations they came out of. If you notice on the caps, they are numbered from 1 through 6. There's 6 cam caps seven cam caps on each cam on the intake and on the exhaust. They have an arrow pointing towards the front of the engine, and they're numbered, and they also have an E for the exhaust and an I for the intake. Main reason I want to put them in that cardboard box lid is so that nothing else comes in contact with the bearing surface on the bottom of the cam caps. If you look on the bottom, that's where the bearing surface is, and you don't want anything getting in there and causing any sort of scarring. Now that those are all out and organized and in a safe spot, we're going to move on to the intake cam. Now we're going to go through the same process on all of the cam caps on the intake side. We're going to start loosening them little by little, and we're not going to loosen any of them all the way. We're going to loosen a couple turns here, there, and so on, and then come back and do it over and over again until all the cam caps are loose, and then lift the cam caps and the bolts off. All of those cam caps are off, so there's nothing else holding our intake or exhaust cam gear. I'm sorry, 1 through 7 on the exhaust side and 1 through 7 on the intake side. That way they are out of the way, don't get damaged. Now your intake cam should be loose, your exhaust cam should be loose, and what you want to do is find a good place to put them. You don't want them on an uneven surface. You don't want them anywhere that they can get scratched. As I was just telling you guys about being careful about where you put this stuff, I realized my kids are always in the garage, and there's probably a good chance that they're gonna step over or kick some of this stuff. So what I did is get a 6-foot fold-out table that we had in the back garage, and I'm gonna place all of my parts, cylinder head, and everything out here. I'm gonna do my best to make sure nothing is super greasy so it's not dripping on the nice floor, but at the same time, this will give me a place to keep all of my parts nice and organized and off of the floor. Yep, I feel a lot better about that. So I've got most of my parts laid out here. Very visible, better than being in a giant bin of parts. Camshafts are out. Neatly placed here and protected with some microfiber cloths under them. Can you guess what we're doing next? Not quite the head bolts yet. So next, what we're going to do is pull all of the buckets off of each of the valves. So you've got the exhaust valves on this side, intake valves on this side, and the shimmed buckets, you want to make very, very sure that they are labeled correctly and you know exactly which valve they go on, and that's exactly the way they need to be reassembled afterwards. So We're going to carefully take all of these out, put them in an order and in a place where we'll remember which one goes where. The easiest way to get these buckets out is grab yourself, I've got a magnet on the end of an extension here, but get yourself a magnet, put it on there, and spin around a little bit, and they'll come right out. Again, make very sure you notate exactly where each of these go. If you want, you can wipe the top down, wipe the oil down, and write on there with a Sharpie. That's an easy way to do it. For now, I'm going to take all of these out, place them in order on my microfiber cloth on the table, and then go back, wipe them down, and label each one with a Sharpie. I've got all of the buckets along with the shims that are on top of them laid out. We've got our intake side here, our exhaust side here, all in the correct order. I've got the oil cleaned off the top. Now we're going to go back and label them with a Sharpie. On this side, it will be E1 through E12. This will be I1 through I12. These are all labeled now. That way, just in case anything gets knocked out of place, we know which one goes where, and we're not depending on just our placement on a table. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the fuel rail and injector. In order to remove the fuel rail, we need to do a few things. From the fuel pressure regulator, we've got the flexible hose here. Wow, that's not flexible at all anymore. It's rock hard. That is for the fuel return line that sends the excess fuel pressure back to your fuel tank. I'm going to remove that. Then you've got your banjo fitting and a bracket right here. That's the banjo fitting for the fuel feed that comes from the fuel filter. We want to remove the bolt on the top of that banjo fitting right there, if you can see it in the video, and that'll pop off. There's a crush washer generally underneath that, and sometimes I think above it as well in this case. So make sure you don't lose those or they don't fall down in anywhere. You'll be putting new ones on anyway, but just so they don't fall down where they shouldn't be, make sure you grab those as things come apart. The next thing you want to do is remove this 12mm bolt here, this one here, and this one right here. And that will loosen up the fuel rail as far as where it's attached to the intake manifold, putting pressure on the fuel injectors and holding them in place. Oh, one other thing, before you remove those, unclip the connectors from the fuel injectors. That's these guys right here, 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 and so on. If you notice, they're alternating colors. That way you don't put them in the wrong place whenever you're putting things back together. In my case, it might be different on different engine harnesses. The front one is gray, then it's rotating between brown, gray, and then brown at the back. So I'm going to go ahead and get those unclipped, remove this hose, get the banjo bolt and the bracket disconnected, and then get the fuel rail pulled off of the intake manifold and the cylinder head. Now that we have the fuel rail off, I want to show you what the components are. So you've got 3 of these little spacers, these little black spacer blocks, and the 3 bolts that hold the fuel rail in place on the intake manifold. The bolt goes through and into the intake manifold, and on the back side, you've got the spacer that fits in right there to space it out the correct distance from the intake manifold so that everything seats up correctly. So when you're removing those bolts and then lifting the fuel rail up, make sure not to drop these. If you do, locate them, keep them safe, and you're going to need those to reassemble everything. Now, let's take a look at the actual injectors. I'm curious to see what the condition is. Oops, let me get a towel. I had to go grab a few towels and get all that cleaned up. I don't mind oil, grease, things like that in my garage because I can clean it up and leave the garage door open for a day and the smell goes away. Whenever fuel spills anywhere, I try to get it cleaned up right away, and all of the towels I use to clean it up, I take it outside in the garbage can and throw it away because that smell just doesn't go away very easily. It just soaks in everything and it will smell for weeks and weeks and weeks. All right, rant over. So let's see the condition of the, oh wow, these are rock hard. There is no flexibility left in those. The O-rings, these are still a little pliable. These here, yep, these are rock hard as well. So these were, I bet you that there was vacuum leaks going past the this portion right here that fits into the intake manifold. That's pretty common. an easy way to diagnose it is to take carb cleaner, and while you're idling, just spray carb cleaner down into the areas where the injectors fit into the intake manifold. And as soon as that carb cleaner gets sucked in through that vacuum leak, you'll hear the engine RPMs change a little bit, or the engine sound, and you'll know that you have a vacuum leak at that particular spot. But I can guarantee you there was at least a slight vacuum leak. These are all rock hard, and they came out very, very easily out of the intake manifold. They weren't really sealed up in there well, so that tells me that there wasn't much holding them in place as far as tension against like a rubbery, flexible surface. And I'm glad we've got these out and ready to replace them. These are the original injectors, or at least they're factory ones if they were replaced at any point. What we're going to do is replace them with newer, better injectors. These are the old style 2-hole injectors. I'm going to do a little bit of research and see if I can find a good quality refurbished or brand new 6 or 12-hole injector that'll give us a better spray pattern. Not going to make much of a difference on power, but it will generally, on most vehicles, going from the old style injectors to the newer, you'll generally have a little bit better throttle transition, maybe better fuel economy. Generally, that's mostly tied to your O2 sensors and how the ECU is tuned, though. But we'll see what is available on the market, fits, and is good quality and not Chinese junk. Now, to pull that harness through the firewall into the engine bay so that we can fish it through the intake manifold runners, we want to come back here in the interior of the car. I've already got a lot of stuff gutted here, so it's easier to see, but really you're only messing with this little dash area right behind the glove box. So whether your interior is in or not, it's going to be the same process. First thing you want to do is remove the glove box itself. At the bottom of the glove box lid, there are 2 screws that go here and here for 2 tabs that hold it on there. Remove those 2, and then you can unclip the glove box and remove it and put it aside. Then you want to remove the speaker grill cover. There's a screw at the bottom that goes right here, and then once that's out, you pull it gently and it unclips and it comes out. Then you'll need to remove this clip from the back of the speaker assembly. Next thing you'll want to do is remove this screw, this one, which I already took out, and this one here. And I think that's all you need to do in order to pop this section here out. And then the ECU we'll see is right behind that, and we'll see what else we have to remove to get to the harness. Now that I've got those screws out, it releases this guy here, and this is, I think this is your amplifier for the factory radio. Not 100% sure. I think that's what it is. Anyway, once those bolts are loose, they're the ones that hold this bracket on, and this will come down. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect it just so it's not dangling here and place it out of the way. Now that that's out of the way, I don't have to worry about any of the wires or the connectors getting messed up. Next thing we do is look in here, and that guy is your ECU. That is the engine control computer, and it is held on by a bracket on the back. And if you see right there, see that gold screw right there? That guy needs to come off. And then also at the bottom, you're going to see another set of bolts. It's this one here, I think, that needs to come off. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect both of these 2. I don't know. I don't think this one's holding that bracket on, but at least this one. So I'm going to remove these 2 and the one at the top, and then see if that loosens up the ECU enough to where we can wiggle it out and disconnect the harness. Yep, it was both of them at the bottom and then the one at the top, and now our ECU is disconnected from the bracket. What I'm going to do is try to rotate it here and move it over to the side so I can have access to all the connectors on the back. Now I'm going to go through one by one very gently, remove each of these connectors. That way the harness is disconnected completely from the ECU. We'll put the ECU aside and then try to figure out how to get this harness through the firewall. I still need a little bit more visibility, so I'm going to remove this box here, one of the other control units. One bolt here that holds it to a bracket, that's all that holds it. I'm going to loosen it up and take that bracket off, then disconnect the connector and see how much space we have behind. I know it's difficult to see, but now I've got good access to, I think, everything I need. This is the portion of the harness that connected to the ECU from the engine harness. It looks like this connector here is also going to the engine harness, and maybe that connector right back there. Before I start disconnecting these two, I'm going to gently pull on the grommet on the engine bay side along the firewall to pull it out a little bit, and then determine which one of these connectors is in fact connected to the engine harness, and then start feeding them through one by one. This is our engine harness here that goes to everything, and I'm going to gently pry up on this guy here. If you need to use a flathead or something, go ahead and do that. Just try not to rip it. And we'll get this guy through the firewall and then start tugging on the harness. There we go. That's out. And we got, yeah, this one's wiggling back and forth, and we'll be able to determine which connectors are connected to it from the other side, make sure they're all disconnected, and then gently start feeding it through on this end. Now I've got the harness pulled out. As you can tell, there's the main connectors that went to the ECU, then that large connector that went to the sub harness, and then the smaller connector that went to the other sub harness. The other thing you want to make sure to do before you start yanking on this harness through the firewall, the diagnostic connector is part of your engine harness. It was bolted right here. It's a 12mm head bolt. Undo that and just take it right off. I didn't want to pull it off of the bracket because a lot of times these plastic pieces are pretty brittle from after all these years, so instead I just removed the bolt, and for now I just put the bolt back into the firewall so I don't forget where it goes. Next thing we're going to do is unclip the harness from a few different spots right here, and I already unbolted it from the firewall much earlier on, and I think there might be one more connector over there. And then once we get those off, what I'm going to do is fish the entire harness gently down through the intake manifold, the lower manifold between cylinder 4 and 5. Gently pull it down. A lot of these wires are old and brittle, so take your time, and if anything gets snagged up, don't keep tugging on it. Just stop, reassess where you're stuck, and gently pull it through. Once you get that through the intake manifold, there's only a couple of other things that might be holding your cylinder head on, and I'll go through those in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and snake that through the manifold, and then we'll continue. One other thing I did before I pulled the harness through the intake manifold is remove the two banjo bolts on either side of the fuel filter. The fuel filter is right below this runner. There's a banjo bolt on this side that holds the hard line that comes up to the fuel rail, and there's a banjo bolt on this side of the fuel rail that goes to the flexible feed line that goes back to the fuel pump hat on the fuel tank. So I undid both of those, got them out of the way. That way I've got as much room as possible to feed the harness down through there. Now let's go ahead and do that. So I've got part of the harness through there, the entire section with the connectors for the fuel injectors and the throttle body. All of that is through. The bulk of the harness that goes and wraps around here and then back into the firewall, I still haven't pushed that through. I can force it. There's enough room down there too, but just with as old as this truck is, it's a 1997, and how brittle the wires might be, I don't want to force it through there. At this point, I'm not going to shove the rest of the harness through the intake manifold. Instead, what I'm going to do is start removing the head bolts that hold the cylinder head onto the short block, remove the bolts that hold the front cover, the front timing cover to the bottom of the cylinder head, get all of those disassembled, and then get the cylinder head to where it's completely disconnected, start lifting it up and move it out of the way. And as I do that, I'll have enough slack on the engine harness to pull it the rest of the way through. And that way I'm not trying to shove it all down into that same space and curl it up into multiple bends where it might get damaged. So let's go ahead and get started on the cylinder head bolts. Now let's walk through what you need to get the cylinder head bolts off. At first glance, if you're not used to seeing them, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, what kind of funky looking bolt is that? What kind of tool do I need? It's nothing special. It's literally a 12-point 12mm socket. If you don't have any 12-point sockets, go get you some from the local hardware store or the automotive parts store, and that's all you're gonna need. If you don't know what a 12-point socket is, first time for everything. Here's your quick lesson. A normal socket has 6 sides to it. A 12-point socket has 12 points to it, like this. This is a 12-point socket. This is what you're going to need in a 12mm size in order to fit on the Toyota head bolts and be able to remove them. So if we look, let's see, let's find one here. It should fit, yep, right on there, nice and snug. And that's what you're going to need in order to remove those. Now we want a ratchet with a long handle, or we're going to need a breaker bar to give us enough torque to where we're not struggling to get these off. The way you want to remove the cylinder head bolts, do not remove one completely and the next one and the next one. You will risk warping the head if you do that. What you want to do is first, before you remove any of the cylinder head bolts, remove these two right here, this one and this one. Those are the ones that hold the front timing cover, which is this guy right here, to the bottom of the cylinder head. Remove those two. You can remove those two completely, put them away, and then what you want to do is crack each one of the cylinder head bolts loose, one by one. Just crack them loose. Don't even make a full turn. Then come back, and what I like to do is start at the outside edges of the cylinder head. So here, then the far two, then these two, then the next row. And what I will do is make one full turn, loosening them. So one full turn here, here, and then so on until you get to the middle. Then go back, do the same thing again, one full turn, starting from the outside there, going to the middle, then do a third full turn, and by that point you should have things loose enough to where you can start loosening them one by one and take the bolts out. Now we've got all of the bolts off, the front two for the timing cover, all of the head bolts. This is what the head bolts look like when they're out, if you're curious. There was one more bolt I had to remove. I think I have to remove it. I went ahead and did. It's the one that goes right in here, this spot right here, that holds this hose, this hard hose on. I think that goes down to a soft hose that goes to the engine block on one of the nipples down there, if I remember correctly. So now that everything is loose, the only other thing that needs to happen in order to get this thing off is the rest of the engine harness needs to be carefully snaked down through there, but we can't do that until we lift the cylinder head off and kind of move it out of the way. I don't want to lay the cylinder head on anything that will dent the surface on the bottom because it is aluminum and it's soft metal. So I need to think for a second and see how I'm going to do that and give it a nice soft surface to sit on that's not going to jeopardize the surface of the aluminum. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and give it a little lift test to make sure that everything is off. Let's see. Yep. All right. Perfect. It's not stuck or anything. So we've got that loose. I'm going to go get some pieces of wood and then situate them here to where I can lift the cylinder head off, lay them on the wood, get the harness, move down through the intake manifold, and then move the cylinder head off. Y'all ready to see what I did to get this cylinder head to stand up and out of the way? Don't laugh too hard. Fence picket. From right here up to the ledge on the firewall. It's wood underneath. It's 5/8 inch thick cedar, so it's plenty strong to hold it. And now, while it's up here and stable, I'm going to fish the rest of this wiring harness down through the manifold, and now I've got tons of room down here to where I'm not squishing the harness. And then once that's through, I'm going to pick up that intake manifold and cylinder head assembly, place it over here on my rags that I've got laid out, and then assess where we are from there. All right, it is finally out. Man, that is one heavy sucker. Whenever we put this thing back in, I might have to rethink how I do that, or maybe not. We'll see. I am really exhausted. It's about 1:30 in the morning right now, so maybe that has something to do with it too. Let's see where we're at. I did not break the timing guides, but let's take a look at them now that the cylinder head's out. Yeah, they're not in bad shape. They're actually in decent shape. It's gonna be another one of those while I'm in here things. Might as well replace it, along with the timing chain tensioner, the hydraulic one that went right through here on this side, right there. Might as well replace it while we're in here, right? Well, let's check out the head gasket condition. Let me wipe all this down. There's so much crud on here. Can't tell what's what, really. Don't worry about stuff falling into the cylinders. We're gonna clean all that up really good before anything goes back together. All right, let's see. Come on, engine harness, get out of the way. All right, engine harness is out of the way. Let's see what we're working with. All right. What I'm really doing is wiping all of the oil and the coolant off. There's going to be a bunch of junk in the cylinders. Ignore that. What I want to see is the condition of the head gasket here. All right, a little bit of deformation here and here on cylinder number 1, but no penetration from any of the coolant ports into the cylinder or the oil ports. Cylinder number 2, little deformation right here, pushed out along the fire ring, and here as well. Cylinder number 3, right here and right here. Cylinder number 4, right there. Yep. Cylinder number 5, right there. Cylinder number 6 looks the worst, right up against that corner. You know, it's hard to tell whether that was leaking or not. The head gasket is still intact and in good shape, but that may have been leaking, may not. It doesn't look like it did though. The fire ring's still in place. Head gasket material still in place. None of it is really broken apart. This corner is probably worse, even though the fire ring's still there. I see a little bit of material coming up right there. Overall, it's really not in bad shape. It's still decent. And like I said, it wasn't leaking. There was no signs of head gasket leakage. All the compression and leak down numbers came out okay. I really didn't even care to change the head gasket here, but my main thing was to get the cylinder head off of the motor so I can clean all of this crap down here, over there, over there, over there. I just want to get all this stuff clean so that I know it went back together as clean as possible, because it's so gross. There's just oil and 25 years of crud everywhere. All right, so what did we learn today, boys and girls? We learned that the engine harness does not like to come out of that hole unless the cylinder head is off. And overall, the process isn't too bad. I don't have a lift, I don't have an engine hoist. This is all done in my garage with a few drip pans underneath the truck. And you can do this just as easily. Just follow these steps. Make sure to take your time and unbolt everything, bag everything, label everything, so that you know how things go back together. For now, this is where I'm going to wrap up the video. Nearly 2 a.m. over here. I need to go get this stuff cleaned off. I think I ripped through about 8 or 9 pairs of gloves tonight with all these sharp edges. And I'm going to wrap this video up. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for more updates on this restoration and this project. Lots of good how-to videos coming as we get through a lot of this. If you want to be notified of when new videos are uploaded, make sure to hit that bell icon next to the subscribe button. And in the meantime, I would love to hear y'all's thoughts, comments, and feedback in the comments below. If you're seeing anything that I haven't seen or went through on the video as I'm speaking through all of my observations here, I would love to hear your feedback. I always appreciate the helpful hints and tips that you guys give me as well. In the meantime, I'm going to call it a night. Love you guys. See you next time.